Welcome to Publishing Day of the European Literature Network French Book Week of 2020. My name is Ulysse Roche, and I am very excited to share today with you my findings on French literature publishing in the UK. I am currently undertaking research for Oxford Brookes University on this subject, so Nielsen Book Research shared with me the list of French fiction books published in the UK along with their sales figures. I thank Nielsen Book Research very much for sharing this data with me. In recent years, they highlighted a significant boom of translated fiction in general. But what about French fiction in the UK in particular? These very encouraging figures that you can see about the growth of this market don't go deep enough into the inner dynamics of publishing French translated fiction. This presentation is the first dedicated study to this subject. Today we need to document French literature because it has grown so much to the point that it stands out as a specific market category in its own right. From 2014 to 2018, a huge boom in volume sales and revenue generated took place, with 120,000 more copies sold and an increase of £1 million in value sales as a result. The market of French fiction publishing in the UK has grown to a whole new level. 240 more titles entered the market in just 5 years. That is to say, a growth of 21.5% of the total number of French novels available in the UK. 2015 was the highest performing year, with 480 copies sold on average, generating nearly 4 million in sales values. The following years stabilized this spectacular growth. On average, every year, from a total of 1,250 titles available on the market, only 5 titles reach more than 10,000 sales. 10 total more than 5,000 copies, almost 80 past the bar of the 1,000 sales, and a little more than 150 titles managed to sell more than 500 copies. So, sales figures and revenue may vary year on year, either in great leaps, as between 2014 and 2015, or remain stable overall from 2016 to 2018, but the repartition of these sales between the top titles and the rest remains much the same. In other words, the market as a whole may grow, but the repartition of this growth between the different brackets stays proportional as follows. The top 10 titles accounting for a third of total sales, the top 100 for 3/4, and the top 500 for nearly the totality of sales. Publishing French literature in the UK is indeed a challenging business, as the market of French translated fiction is risky, half of the books published don't make any sales, concentrated, the top 100 titles accounting for nearly 3/4 of the sales, and stable, as the steady growth of the market has not impacted the way it is shaped and concentrated. How paradoxical for a market to be at the same time risky, concentrated, and stable. Now, when you take a closer look at those figures and you segment the charts, you can easily spot where the sales of French translated fiction go. Let's focus on the sales of contemporary fiction only. We can see on this graph that it clearly follows the pattern of the overall sales evolution. This correlation between the two lines shows how much contemporary literature has been a driving force in the recent growth of the French translated fiction market. This is even more true when you consider the percentage of total sales that the top 50 and the top 10 contemporary titles account for. 37% of sales of the whole market are from the top 50 contemporary titles. It's a really strong evidence of how concentrated the sales in the market can get. The top 10 contemporary titles account for 1/4 of French book sales in the UK. Therefore, contemporary titles are the ones that reach deeper into the UK book market, finding new audiences or appealing more and more to the same readers. There is absolutely no better example than the truth about the Harry Kéber affair from Swiss novelist Joël Dicker to show how a title can rocket the charts. The first hardback edition in 2013, published by McLeod's Press, was already topping the charts, but the paperback editions that followed in 2015 concentrated nearly 15% of the whole sales of the market of French literature for this year. It sold more than 125,000 copies overall in 5 years. However, contemporary literature achieves lower sales overall than classics of French literature, which have regular sales every year. Therefore, the prospect for the publication of contemporary literature can get very high, indeed, but it can't hide the precariousness of this market. In comparison, classics constitute a fairly consistent market with strong backlist characteristics. Non-contemporary titles may not shine at the top of the table, but they represent the bulk of French literature sold and published in the UK. 20th century French novels from Simenon, Camus, François Sagan, and Jean-Paul Sartre are rivaling at the top, but the huge number of Simenon's novel has no equivalent. It could almost form a market category of its own. Penguin has published 75 books of the Inspector Maigret series, who score between 300 and 15,000 unit sales per title every year. Per title! Great names of French literature drive considerable sales, though they are less spectacular, as reflected by the sales figure of Alexandre Dumas' Comte de Monte Cristo in multiple editions. The stark concentration of sales around specific titles implies the concentration of the best-selling books in the catalogue of certain publishers. So then, who are those publishers who must be the most important publishers on this market? As we would expect, publishing conglomerates and their various imprints dominate the market. But on an operational level, their imprints have a lot in common with smaller independent publishers which in some cases can rival with the big names in the market. Both independents and conglomerates coexist, however. From the 500 best-selling titles, 218 are published by Penguin Classics and 290 overall by imprints from Penguin, including Vintage, Orville Sakers, and others. On the other hand, Hachette and MacLeod's Press spearhead the contemporary fiction market with 73 titles out of the 250 top-selling contemporary books. The giant Hachette includes several imprints from other important groups listed here. Some of these publishers publish only one or two French authors, especially in crime. Michel Bussy for W&N, Bernard Minier for Mulholland Books, and when you consider the success of Pierre Lemaitre for MacLeod's Press or Fred Vargas for Orville Sakers, we could say that a best-selling French crime writer is a true asset, if not the necessary basis to publish French fiction. Other groups are on the rise with their own method and focus. Picador from Pan Macmillan has taken an increasing interest in French fiction and to great success. The Reader of the 627 from Jean-Paul Didier Laurent, for instance, was the top-selling title of 2016. Bloomsbury seized the opportunity when Patrick Modiano won the Nobel Prize to publish a great number of its titles. A small group like Oldcastle Books and its dedicated crime imprint No Exit Press took on André Michaud, one of the only French-Canadian authors to feature in the top bracket of French translated fiction sales. Gallic Press is the most proficient independent publisher of French fiction in the UK, and this comes from the fact that it is dedicated only to release English translation of French fiction books. Other publishers embrace French fiction as part of their general editorial project to publish contemporary translated literature. Faber and Faber, for instance, publishes very few but very successful translated fiction. Europa Press was founded in 2005 by Italian publishers to introduce European fiction to the UK and the US. Granta Books emerged from Granta Magazine, a magazine dedicated to international literary fiction. Hesperus Press has focused mainly on Denis Thierry's moving novels. The first to be published in the UK was The Lonely Life of a Postman, which reached more than 16,500 sales for the whole period. Canongate Books, the Scottish publisher, take on translated fiction as part of its fiercely independent policy. Fitzcarraldo introduced a new approach to publishing translated fiction since 2014, based on a branding strategy, and on the singularity of its editorial line. Dawn Books, with its unique bookshop in Marylebone, London, started publishing in 2010. I could not name all the fantastic independents that are publishing French fiction. Les Fugitives, Oriental Books, One Word Publishing, and many others. When it comes to classics, independents also have a strong presence with their own special focus. Accessibility with £2.50 Wordsworth Classic Collection, and exclusivity. Even though classics are most of the time free of rights, Alma Books is the only publisher to make an English version of Celine's Journey to the End of the Night available in the UK. Publishers from the academic and education sector are also involved. Surprisingly, some paperback French publishers like Livre de Poche and Pocket reach the UK readership in the original language. Kif Kif Demain, the phenomenon from Weizagen, made its way to the UK in a French Livre de Poche edition and achieved good sales. When it comes to compare publishers of contemporary French fiction only, Hachette dominates ahead of Penguin. Groups are still at the top, but independents take an increasing share of the market, as the table on the right shows. It compares the number and the share of titles published by conglomerates and by independents, instead of a 70-30 proportion. The balance is closer to 60-40 for contemporary titles only. The field of contemporary fiction is therefore more open to independents to blossom and for new actors to take to this market. Now the question is, when do those publishers release new publications and when are the top-selling books published? You can see on this graph the dents de scie or hiccup pattern spread throughout the year, and it tells you that there is no one time in the year when translated fiction is released in the UK. It does plummet in December, January, has the whole fiction and trade publishing sector, but it has a peak between May and September, while the peak for the sector in general is March, May, and September, November. Approximately the same number of titles are published in the first half and the second half of the year. It tells you that translated fiction and French translated fiction is often published off-season during the summer, but it can do well in more crowded publication period too. On average, French translated titles are priced higher than the average consumer price, which in 2014 was at £7.66. From 2014 to 2018, the average RRP for this category decreased by 70 pennies for the whole market and 90 pennies for the contemporary French fiction market. Contemporary titles stick to average paperback formats, while the whole market has a wider price range from £1 tiny classics to £30 fine-bound editions. This overall reduction in price shows that French translated books are more integrated into the British book market, a consequence of increasing sales and general attention. It also evidences that French translated titles are becoming more widely accessible in larger quantities to the UK public. Now is the time to sum up the main takings of the research. First, the number of French titles published in the UK has increased by more than 20%. In the growth in sales from 2014 to 2018, 2015 was a watershed year. The market is highly concentrated, marked either by bestseller phenomena or long-selling backlist successes. These are the two different market conditions, one for contemporary publications and one for classics of French literature. Even though the two are published by the same or similar actors and often considered together as one general sector of French book, there's a real difference between the two actually. The market for classics on the one end and the market of contemporary fiction on the other. If classics of French literature are the suns at the heart of the galaxy of French literature in the UK, contemporary titles are its comets, either dazzlingly grabbing our attention or sadly passing unnoticed above distracted observers. Beside the big players who hold the keys to the market, other players, smaller in size, have recently entered the market of French books in translation. Independents have developed the market either by re-exploring classics or by expanding the spectrum of contemporary literature available in the UK. Throughout the year, the publication of French translated fiction has developed both in and off-season, with a peak at the height of the summer. Prices are slightly higher for contemporary fiction titles than for classics. The overall trend, however, follows a slow reduction in price, indicating that French translated fiction is becoming increasingly established and accessible to the UK readership. French literature in the UK has sized up, but the way the market is shaped has not so much changed. Sales are still concentrated, split between bestsellers and backlists, and French is still the leading language to be translated in the UK. Nevertheless, things are moving. Post-lockdown conditions are far from ideal for the publishing industry. The sector of translated literature was hit hard, like the rest of the publishing industry, by the 2008 economic crisis. Soon, it will face potential lowering sales, cuts in budget, resulting in fewer publications, and a looming 3% figures in ambush. Just as a reminder, the 3% figure I just mentioned corresponds to the former share of books in translation published in the UK. Today, thanks to the efforts of the whole industry, this figure is no longer correct. Yet, translated fiction is able to resist dire conditions. Maybe because it is so used to such difficult situations, it shows only gradual fluctuation and a surprising stability, which comes from the following paradox highlighted here by Rüdiger Wischenbach Consulting. In general, the output of new titles often resists a market decline, as publishers try to compensate for smaller average sales per title by rolling out more products and by insisting on the cultural and not just the economic value of books in a society. This sector of publishing can count on the commitment of its actors to their profession and passion. More than ever, everyone needs to collaborate, even remotely, and this is the whole purpose of this French Book Week and of Euro Literature Network as well. As for the publishing model in itself, actors will need to stick together and find new solutions to reduce cost while securing sales and protecting the diversity of titles published in the UK at the same time. Demand-driven publishing models of sales and production, like print-on-demand or subscription book club editions, may prove interesting to explore. French translated fiction is not the most precarious of foreign fiction language in the UK, obviously. Compared to other less represented languages, it should resist relatively better. Then, French fiction publishing has a role to play in leading translated literature publishing past the upcoming crisis and to further develop it in the coming years. To conclude, I would say that French is definitely not the only language to be translated and published in the UK, but it is one of the most important in many respects, both in the past and for the future.